The Adventurer by David Kerr. I am going to kill you, Ember growled, fists bunched tightly and her chin jutting out. She so desperately wanted to let out a flurry of punches, but no. She'd hold them in. She could do that. She wouldn't crack. You're overreacting, Andre calmly replied, a somewhat pleasant smile beaming at her. It looked so practiced and well-oiled, it just made Ember even more angry, her nails digging into the palms of her hands. Oh, really? Because I'm a woman? He looked offended. Don't be ridiculous. It's because you're histrionic. What? Her booming voice echoed about the chamber. You really have a pair on you, don't you? You're the reason we're in here. She thrust a finger in his chest. Her eyes were smouldering like hot coals. Andre looked decidedly unbothered by the situation. It's not as bad as it looks, he shrugged. Not as bad as it looks. Lerskine caught us, took our weapons, and locked us up in a cage above a pit of... Ember stared at the purple soup below with disdain. God knows what, and all because why exactly? She asked, cupping her ear at him. Look, I wasn't to know a guard would come along whilst I was peeing. He was very matter-of-fact about the issue, which just fueled the anger directed at him. Couldn't you have just tied a knot in it, put a cork up it, whatever you needed to do, just to avoid that absolute catastrophe we had back there, Andre sat down and the cage began a very subtle sway back and forth. Then he looked up. I heard it was bad to do that. Not good for your health at all. Are you kidding me? No, I'm absolutely serious. Dr. Niven told me. Fascinating chap. Ember took a step closer and glared at him. The billowing, sulphurous flames of Hades raged in her eyes. He averted his eyes, suddenly feeling a bit more conspicuous. Niven, the quack. The utterly harebrained imbecile who thinks that leeches are the solution to almost everything. You listened to him. He's actually a rather fascinating sort. We get on rather well, actually. Andre arched his back and rested his palms to the side of himself on the cage floor. Why does that not surprise me? Ember hissed. Oh, by the gods, how she ended up in this place with this idiot! If she ever escaped, how would she explain to the guild that she was caught because Andre the Adventurer was actually a cretin without adequate bladder control? Why had she reformed? Couldn't she just go back to killing for coin? Right now, she considered doing it for free. There was a silence for a while. Andre just sat there, off in his thoughts whilst Ember counted back from 1,000,000, trying to let her thoughts of homicide go. Sadly, she kept losing her place and was daydreaming at the ways she could kill her cellmate. Some notions were comedic, others were downright pornographic. The mental image of shoving his severed head up his arsehole was currently providing some degree of comfort. We're going to be fine, you know. Oh, no. Why did he have to open his mouth again? How? Neither of us has a key out of here. We don't have our swords or our pistols. We're just stuck here waiting for starvation or for Lerskine to come back and kill us. Either way, we're going to be very dead. The only lottery is for when and how. She crossed her arms, her armour clunked together, and she fidgeted. Tired, hot, angry. It was a lethal combination. His neck would snap so easily, I'm sure of it. Swords or not, we still have our wits. I've been in worse situations than this, I can assure you. And how many of your associates have died? When she lowered her tone, she became even more intimidating. Anyone who knew Ember was also aware that it typically foreshadowed a ruthless beating from the raven-haired warrior. Andre was, however, quite oblivious to the fact. He just chuckled. Ember's stare intensified. Oh, you're being serious, aren't you? A slow nod was her reply. Okay. He started mumbling to himself as he counted off numbers on his hands, occasionally correcting himself and starting again. As he got near the end of his second hand, he started to look a tad concerned. I think it's probably best I not say. That bad, huh? Unbelievable. Shaking her head, she finally sat back against the wall of the cage, clanging her armour against the rusted bars. The little prison rocked with the movement, and she tensed. I was exaggerating for comic effect. Well, if you're looking to make me laugh, that backfired. Andre just stared at her, an eyebrow raised. He was trying to make sense of her. Some would have thought that getting captured was what had incited such rage, but he'd noticed his disposition since they had left the guild's hall. And how could I have failed with such a receptive audience? Ember's eyes turned into slits. Just do us both a favour and shut up. In reply, Andre nodded and lay himself flat across the floor. Ember wanted to kick his feet, as she thought they were too close, but it would have seemed excessively petty. She found a more subtle way to hurt him later on. Subtle, but sufficiently vicious, she hoped. The last few weeks had been so unkind to her. She had made the journey back home for pilgrimage as she did every year, and returned to the news that her father was to remarry. It was a shock. It was always going to be a shock, but under normal circumstances she'd have made an effort to be happy at the union. Learning that his bride was a fellow student at the academy and that all her mother's belongings had been sold, that had been the part that she had choked on. If she had to suffer one more lecture about love having no age limit, she'd knock someone's teeth out. He was literally fucking someone young enough to be his daughter, and she was an avaricious bitch at that. Ember gagged as the thought did lapse in her head. Andrea didn't move. The whole pilgrimage had been ruined. She had failed to appease her gods, and the home that should rightfully be hers would now be passed to another. She positively choked on it. Fuckers. She cursed out loud, her voice once again carried around the space that enclosed them. Andre still didn't move. Was he sleeping? She leaned in and heard the deep breathing of sleep. You have got to be joking. He was asleep in a cage above a pit, and was probably going to be executed, but he was asleep. This man was a legend, a brave swordsman, adventurer, and righter of wrongs, if the stories were to be believed, but now it became apparent to Ember that the stories were just complete and utter bollocks. He started to snore. The Broken Bow was a pub renowned for many things: booze, fights, and, well, more fights. But the rules were always very straightforward. No weapons. If you raised someone's ire, it would have to be settled by fists alone. The policy had kept death to a minimum, and the interior mostly intact. There was one panel riddled with bookshot, but that was from a rare occasion when Pillen, the proprietor, had been forced to brandish his shotgun in a swift and most effective reminder of the rules. It also served another very useful purpose, as it was a place where men and women who did not belong to the guild, nor follow guild guidelines, could acquire work and others could seek their services. When Andre, one of the most loyal patrons, became Andre the Adventurer, its reputation spread across Valis. Pillen had to improve, then expand, and then expand some more. It was no longer a quaint pub for those seeking fame and fortune, it was now an official hub for adventurers. As Andre finished another beer, he noted that Garen Bliss was now resting his head on the table and making a moaning noise. I miss the way it used to be. I don't like it anymore. It's all your pissing fault. Stop being so bloody chivalric and whatnot. He belched loudly and clumsily scratched his face. Do you think I like it this way? Andre replied, perhaps a little too loudly. I don't care, Bliss answered, unable to raise his head. It's your fault, so you could shove your job up your bum. What? You heard. Bliss, I wasn't even offering you a job. You weren't? Andre pushed his empty tankard to the side and leaned in. No, I wasn't. Oh. Bliss fought valiantly for a thought through the haze of alcohol. When it finally emerged from that beer-laced miasma, he felt a sense of pride. Why the balls are you here? Meeting a client. He slipped out his pocket watch and surreptitiously checked the time. Who I'm obliged to meet at this very moment. Well, good for you. Now, leave me and Samantha alone. Samantha? She's my ale and my woman, as is both bitter yet happy to spend time with me if I have coin. Andre rolled his eyes, stood up, and scattered a few coins in front of his friend. Make sure you sleep in an actual bed tonight. Bliss thanked him by way of thumbs up, and Andre went to meet his client. Up one flight from the ground floor, Andre was faced with a long corridor leading off to rooms on either side, each filled with a plethora of different souls, from the weary traveller to the adulterous scoundrel, the latter being considerably louder, particularly if the noises from room 12 were anything to go by. That bed was not going to last the night. On the top floor, there were two luxurious rooms, the Swan and Raven suites. His client awaited him in the former. He felt oddly conspicuous and hoped he didn't smell too much of booze. Okay, here it goes, he mumbled and then rapped his knuckles on the door. A slightly deep but distinctly female voice called out in reply. Enter. Andre reached for the handle. The sound of hissing and snarling jolted Andre out of his sleep. Well, that and the sound of Ember shouting, What the fuck is that? He was up like a shot and over to the bars in a heartbeat. Some 30 or so feet below, the giant, gnashing fangs of a creature burst from the purple slop, its eyes bulging in frenzied hunger. Primitive arms with webbed digits swung out before it, flailing wildly. A salty smell accompanied it that made them both gag. Andre banged his head against the bars. We may have a slight problem. Embra, not easily frightened, looked aghast at the creature. What is it? That, Andre answered, is an acidulous crackmore. A what? Acidulous crackmore. A very rare predator found in highly acidic waters. Its jaws can break through oak beams like they're twigs. They've bitten through the hulls of ships before. Andre sighed like it was a bit of an inconvenience, and he didn't have the time for it. That sounds completely made up. Its jaws snapped together again, and she heard the violent splashing below as it landed back into the water. But, she peered down cautiously, I can believe it. She looked around and tried to understand what was going on. They're going to lower us down to that thing, aren't they? Yep, looks that way. I guess we'd better get out of here then. Oh, if only I'd had such a great idea. Don't worry about it. I've always been a creative sort. He wasn't rising to the sarcasm. That actually annoyed Embra even more. Seeing him pissed off would help justify a bit of timely rage. Would you like to hear my plan? Her cage companion seemed renewed and full of fresh energy. I guess so. She replied with a total lack of enthusiasm. The words were so dead they may as well have been corpses. Okay, well, it's fairly simple. My plan is to get the door open, climb atop the cage, break the rope that leads to the pulley system, bring the cage crashing down at just the right moment to crush the acidulous crackmore, and we'll walk over to the outcropping they brought us in on and walk out the doorway to freedom. Andre said it also casually, as though it were comparable to making a sandwich or lighting a candle. Embra was just aghast. Had he actually considered his idea at all? And what if we clip the cabin wall and flip the cage? We'll be an acid. If we don't, will the cage even withstand the acid? What if we miss the crackmore? Won't it just eat us? No, I worked it out all in my head. That revelation gave rise to true terror inside Embra. You're just gonna have to trust me. Trust you? Do you have any idea how much you sound like a used cart salesman? Embra's eyes were slits. I thought people liked to be placated. Not me! Her muscles swelled as she tensed up. Everyone else? Andre had perfected a shrug that fit like a tailor's suit. Embra went to angrily defend the rest of humanity, but the air wheezed out of her as she realized. Most people did like that kind of thing. How often had she wheeled out the usual assurances to calm her mother, after all? Okay, you may have a point. She unfolded her arms and settled them on her hips and looked squarely at Andre. I honestly think this will get us out. He brushed a strand of hair from his eyes and waited for a reply. The moment went on a little longer than he'd hoped. Okay, fine. I think you're going to get us both killed, but screw it. That's going to happen anyway. At least we're dictating the terms here. But, frankly, I don't know how you're expecting to get that door open. Andre smiled a very winning smile at Embra. Don't, she replied. Already make me regret that decision. Andre smirked as he sat down and started fiddling with his left boot. Oh, yeah. She looked as the strangeness continued. Too late. A mental image of them being stripped of their flesh in a bath of purple acid played in Embra's head. The set of armour was weeks old. It had been custom made, for goodness sakes. Custom made. She cast her eyes upwards. Dear gods, we're dead, and that acid is going to ruin my new plate mail. What are you doing? I'm getting myself equipped, he answered merrily. You're going to bash the gate open with your boot? Her eyebrow was raised so high it wasn't far from her hairline. Nope. Andre twisted the heel of his boot and pulled it free. Beneath was revealed access to a very slim compartment that ran up the back of his boot. From it, he slid a lockpick and a narrow-bladed knife that lacked a handguard. I think these might help them. Embra looked wide-eyed at the tools. We have been stuck in here for 2 hours, and you had those the whole time? No, I had a friend drop off a utility boot whilst we were sitting here, he said dryly, but without malice. What were you doing all that time? She closed the distance between them and peered down at him. I was working out my plan. The maths of it are more complicated than you're giving me credit for. He slipped his boot back on and Embra just shook her head at him. Let's just get out of here. She puffed out her chest and there was a little flicker behind her eyes. I'll just have to kill you later. What about? Andre leapt up and the cage began to sway. Breach of contract. Only applies if I do it before the job's finished. So, totally okay once we've performed our daring rescue? Oh, yes. Embra couldn't help the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. Andre picked up the knife and lockpick, head bobbing in acknowledgement. Seems fair. There was a pang of anxiety as Andre gripped the door handle. Something about the voice just unsettled him. He worried about very little. He had to be that way. In his line of work, he could get shot, stabbed, or even eaten by a great thrace, should he travel to the southern continent. The 3 weeks of slow, agonizing digestion was a popular reason for warriors declining thrace contracts. His only encounter with one had involved a lot of running. For a 23-foot-tall living boulder, it was surprisingly nimble. With all this in mind, any sense of trepidation at opening a door set off alarm bells. His derringer was loaded and tucked up his sleeve. He had the concealed knife in his boot. He could deal with any funny business. He slowly turned the handle and flicked the door open. The inside of the room was sparsely lit. The blinds pulled firmly closed, not a trace of the sun there, just 2 candles giving a warm glow about the bed. Sat on the deep red covers, a woman so slight she barely made an indentation, ensconced in plain, grey robes. The shadows concealed her face. Andre stepped into the room with an assured confidence, completely affected, and kicked the door closed with his heel. His heart was racing chaotically, galloping up his throat and choking him. He sure as hell wasn't going to let it be known. Hello, Meridia. Good. That sounded calm, totally believable. The woman's shoulders sank. Shit. Pushing back the hood, locks of fiery red hair were freed and a pair of piercing green eyes met Andre's. Still a know-it-all, I see. She bit the inside of her mouth. What gave it away? Well, Mary, when you've seen someone naked rather a lot, a cheap cloak tends not to be the best disguise. Meridia blushed, but also felt a flare of anger hit her stomach. Oh, and the tattoo on your finger, that was also a clue. That's ridiculous, I covered it with makeup. She began to stand, a hint of something dangerous in her eyes. Yeah, poorly. You drew attention right to it. Are you looking to have me slap you? Oh, you still do your own slapping. Thought you had royal guards to do that now. Oh, by the gods, not this again. It's been 4 years since... Andre took a step closer and glared at her. Oh, I'm sorry. I hadn't realized my feelings had to work on a time limit. I didn't say that, but come on, 4 years is more than long enough to get over it. Meridia took a step closer, the narrowing space between them ablaze with intensity. I love how you call it. It. You can't even say the words, can you? Would it make you happier if I did? Maybe, Mary. Maybe. She got ready to explode, let a torrent of anger and rage, even self-loathing, just spill out, belch it forth and vent her spleen. As it danced on her lips, the words suddenly made a hasty retreat. Beneath all the anger, she could see it in his eyes. The pain, even after their time apart, was still alive. It still gnawed at him. She felt the guilt suddenly swallow her. Pity for Andre quickly followed. The fight had gone out of her. Andre could feel the change in the air. I didn't come here to argue. I came here because... Her sigh could have blown down a barn. I came here because I need your help. Damn it. Of course she does. Why else would she want to see me? Meridia sank down onto the bed and looked across at Andre. Even through his anger and his pain, he could see that something was troubling her deeply. Whilst the voice in his head screamed of her betrayal, a soothing one tried to remind him he had loved her once. As he saw the rawness in her eyes, the turmoil raging inside of her, he knew that a part of him still did. His sentimentality threatened to enrage him once more. There had to be a moment of quiet inside his own mind. Andre. He could hear the crackling in her voice as the words fought through emerging tears. Someone's... A solitary tear trickled down her face and rested on her chin. He watched this with such befuddlement. The cynical part of him feared he was being played, and yet his better angels, whom he endeavoured to take counsel from, advocated for her, insisting that only desperation would have brought her to him, where they would no doubt reopen old wounds. His altruistic heart, and no doubt the love they had once shared, claimed victory. Andre walked up to Meridia and lowered himself down to one knee. Someone's what? He asked softly. The soothing tone unlocked a door in her. New tears began to flow. Andre, someone's taken my son. So, Andre asked, holding out the set of pics, would you care to do the honours, or shall I? Ember frowned glacially at him. I'm a warrior, not a thief. Fair enough. He walked past her and began to tease at the lock. It's not a bad skill to have, though, you know. Does it not strike you as a dishonourable act? A lock represents order and security. To interfere with one seems disrespectful. Oh, by the gods, these guild types. So, I should just stop and we can die as originally intended. Did I say that there could be no exceptions? She took a half step closer and felt a little too near for his particular liking. But you strike me as someone who has breached more than cell doors. That could be a possibility. I once broke into a private vault in Ephron, and some dedicated help managed to empty it of its contents. The first pin gave into his efforts. So you are a thief. That's open to interpretation. He wiped sweat from his brow. This is a truly superb lock. Interpretation? You're either a thief or you aren't. Stop trying to create grey areas in morality to justify your behaviour. Andre let out a little growl. Did you just growl at me? Yes. He ceased his work on the lock and turned to her. Yes, I did. I'd like to think I'm fairly affable, but your dogmatism is problematic. Pardon me? Ever heard of Roland Bravernon? No. Her arms folded again, and he realised that the frown may as well be tattooed on. He was Duke of Ephron, well connected, in with the king at the time, rather fond of throwing his weight around. He was also, by even the most forgiving accounts, a massive crook. If he hadn't been born into wealth, he'd have been your average vagabond and conman. As it was, his position gave him impunity, and also gave him cachet that could be used for a number of confidence tricks. This is literally making no sense. Why would a wealthy duke need to take money from people with dishonesty? Andre was somewhat incredulous. Have you ever met a rich person? He laughed a sad laugh. They always want more. Always. To do what with? Nothing, except perhaps boast about how much they have. This sounds like lunacy. That's because you're not an avaricious sociopath. Andre cleared his throat and spoke as levelly as possible. Brevan ripped off a lot of people, but when he took money from the Mothers of Mercy, some of us decided to intervene. He went back to the lock and began working away with renewed energy as he replayed that victory in his mind. They had taken every last coin from the bastard. It had felt euphoric. He lived almost entirely on that high for the next fortnight. The Herald went with the headline, Destitute Duke Swindled by Crook, which I always loved. Andre shook his head lightly and laughed. Theft? Maybe. I prefer to look at it as a relocation. The lock popped open. Of wealth. What? Andre couldn't conceal the shock in his voice. How the hell could someone have kidnapped the Prince of Valis? Oh, by the gods, Andre, what am I going to do? Meridia clutched her face and sobbed. Andre shuffled closer and placed his hand gently beneath her chin. Mary, his words as soft as cotton wool, please look at me. She slowly raised her head, rivers of tears now flowing from bloodshot eyes. They're trying to unseat Bartus. They've taken Jonah to humiliate him. They want him to seem weak. Bartus IV was king of Valis. He had struggled for an heir until Meridia. It had stopped a coup, but the Baron still saw him as weak. Andre had no time for him, but in spite of everything, he knew he'd always have time for Meridia. But you're married to the king. He could send 100 men, 1,000 to bring him back. He stroked her arm and looked into her eyes. There was such fear there. Just think, Andre. And he did. The realization came quickly. Shit. If he sends men, he openly admits his son has been taken, which makes him weak and leaves him open to the barons. Meridia just nodded in agreement. But he can't just do nothing. It's his son. The penny then dropped very quickly. Which is why you're here. You need to hire me. I'm sorry, but I needed someone I could trust. Her voice was raw. Every word was strangled by her cries. Andre stood and moved next to his former love atop the bed. Tell me everything you know, and start with who did this. He was resigned that he was going to do this. He didn't even fool himself that he wouldn't. Whatever had happened between himself and Meridia didn't matter right now. A child's life was in peril. It was Lurskin, she croaked. Gabner Lurskin. Right. It's best we try and move in sync. Try and keep the cage as steady as possible. We'll go on a heave and a hoe. Ember wordlessly acknowledged the approach and grasped a hold of the cage's bars. And, Andre added, if it starts swinging wildly, just stop. Ember interjected. Yep. And with that, the two began their short climb upwards, chanting, Heave! Ho! In perfect unison until they were both stood at the centre of the roof, clutching onto the rope from which the entire cage dangled. You do know that this will take some cutting. Certainly looks that way. Would you like to take charge? Andre asked, offering up his blade. Ember shrugged and took it from him without any hesitation. The thick, twisted rope was going to require a lot of effort, and she couldn't help but think she was best suited to the work. She started hacking away with almost frenetic energy, her face set in a stern expression as she focused on the work. As the first few strands started to give way, a little smile crept out at the corner of her mouth. The cage was gently swaying, but not enough to cause any real alarm. Andrew looked downwards at the rippling purple sludge below. The height wasn't bothering him at all, although the idea of being slowly digested by the crackmore, or being melted in the acid, did still niggle at him somewhat. He found he was also beginning to daydream, but that wasn't such a bad thing. After all, he needed something to do whilst Ember worked away, not even stopping for a second to rest her arm. The blade was just a blur. Hopefully it wouldn't suddenly break in two. It was small and very thin, but the workmanship was sufficient, he hoped. As he was so often prone to do, Andre started to idly whistle some of the bar songs that he'd heard in his time. Initially, Ember just ignored the noise, but after a while, they began grating on her. When he reached a tune she'd heard before, which was about a buxom lass from Vallis, she'd found she had had enough. She stopped, took a glance up at Andre, who was, in spite of their situation, looking quite zen. Her glance turned into a glare until his eyes met hers. She tilted her head with a request written in her expression. He almost got the hint, and switched to a new tune that was somewhat more sedate. A little shake of the head, and she just continued. At that moment, the door leading to the outcropping upon which they had been dragged onto the cage opened, and two men walked out. Ember immediately stopped the cutting, even though she had slightly less than a quarter of the diameter to go, and Andre ceased his whistling. Both of them were now holding their breath. Honestly, Merrick, I hate pit duty. It's boring, and I mean, you can smell that, right? What the hell died in here? Cabot frowned and scratched his face. What didn't die in here? Merrick answered with a chuckle. And I don't like being near that thing, Cabot added, jabbing a finger towards the pit. The crackmores seemed to hear the criticism, and they heard a disapproving rumble. You're bothered by Webley? No need to worry. Just stay behind the white line and it won't cause you any trouble. Besides, we're looking after a rare creature, something to be proud of. Merrick seemed to have a strange enthusiasm for the creature. In all likelihood, he was the one who dubbed the thing Webley. Proud? Nah, mate. Not when the thing is that ugly. Another growl came from the pit. Be careful, sounds like you might be pissing him off a little there. Merrick laughed again. Cabot stood still with his rifle and just ignored his friend. They stood in the quiet for a minute or two as Ember and Andre exchanged looks that sought a decision on how to proceed. So, Cabot asked, we're not the ones who'll be doing the torturing, right? I mean, I don't like the idea of doing that kind of thing. Nah, we never do that kind of thing. We aren't senior enough. Merritt laughed again. We just keep an eye on the prisoners until Mr. Nipper arrives, and then we're out of here until he decides he wants them danked. Merritt propped himself against the wall and removed his helmet. Bloody thing's so damned hot. There was no reply from Cabot. I said, this bloody thing is so damned hot. Still no reply. Cabot? He raised his eyes to see Cabot looking upwards. I think we might have a problem, he replied, raising his rifle. What the? Then Merritt found himself staring upwards and drawing his sword. Both men could now see the cage's door ajar, and the vague outline of the two prisoners on top, interfering with something. Cabot walked forward and aimed his rifle at the cage. He could feel the stock settle into the crease of his shoulder. Oi, you two, what the fuck? At that very second, the acidulous crackmore leapt from its pit of acid, its arms once again flailing wildly towards them. Cabot ignored it. He was safely behind the line. However, as he got ready to pull the trigger, he could hear nuisance behind him. Merrick was shouting somewhat. Probably being a joker again. Whatever, he needn't pay attention. When the crackmore's hand grasped at the tip of his toes, he began screaming. Shit, we've been spotted! Emma started cutting at the rope wildly again. One of them has a rifle. We need to be fast. I'm going as fast as I can. Andre looked at the rope. It was so close to giving. Below, they heard a splash and then screams. The rifleman had idly walked beyond the safety line. His friend had been shouting for him to get back, but he'd been lost in aiming at them. Now, he was gripping his friend, trying to drag him back from the creature's iron grasp. There was panic, shouting and screaming. The rifleman was going to die. Andre took another look at the rope. On the count of 3, jump up and down. What the? You're gambling with our lives. Just do it. Ember grudgingly nodded. 1, 3. They jumped up and down in unison. Not quite enough. Again! 1, 2, 3. As their collective weight slanted the cage once more, the world began moving very fast. The rope snapped, their rapid descent began, and they fell on top of the iron prison, gripping it as tightly as they could as a stream of profanity escaped from their lips. Andre had probably got this wrong. They were probably going to die. "Just hold on," Merrick shouted. Cabot was just screaming as the Crackmore's hand gripped ever tighter on his leg. The acid that clung to its skin like morning dew was now eating into his clothing. "No, Webley! Bad Webley!" Merrick was shaking his sword and trying to keep his friend from being dragged away. He let out a guttural cry as he put all his strength into holding on. Then, time seemed to slow down, just for a moment. He heard panicked screams and took but half of a second to look up and think, "What the fuck is that?" The cage, which had angled down slightly on Ember's side, crashed squarely into the Crackjaw's skull. The rapid increase in pressure set its left eye in motion, and it burst out of its socket, thick green blood and cranial slime erupting along with it. The eyeball and tatters of its optic nerve splattered into Merrick's face, and he fell backwards, his arse flying up in the air, all kinds of fluids covering him. The repulsion set in immediately. The Crackmore had been wearing an expression of great satisfaction a moment ago, its broad mouth open for its unexpected meal, spiky teeth ready to delve into flesh and tear Cabot asunder. Then, for a split second, it wore confusion. The iron grip around the guard's foot had been released, green blood quickly started bubbling in its mouth, and agony bloomed in his leg. Andre and Ember were dazed, extremely dazed. Surely they both had concussions? They were trying to stand as they looked at each other, but their bells had been truly rung. Their brains felt dislodged, free to rattle against the insides of their skulls. The sensation made them want to vomit, but neither was willing to succumb. They just needed to get off this damn cage before it sank into the acid. "Come on, legs, brain, all of it, work!" But instead of moving, they both started laughing. It would have been lucky for them to even know what year it was. Cabot was still howling in pain. Merrick was now trying to wipe a collection of the unthinkable from his eyes and face. He tried to stand, but slipped on the discharged eyeball and fell again, bursting it, sending vitreous fluid all around the vicinity. When he tried to stand again, he slipped in that instead. It looked like a scene from a darkly comedic play. Amber was the first to stand as the laughter wore off. She started to get some sense of where she was. She staggered over to the rocky outcropping. The rifleman's pained screamings were making her skull ache. She grabbed him around the collar and punched him into another month. The effort seemed to drain her, and she slumped into the rocky wall and caught her breath. As Andre began to crawl across the ironwork to safety, he started to hear creaking beneath him. He was confident that the sound was not good, and that he'd best go faster. But it was still going to be a crawl that propelled him, just a more laughable crawl where his arms and legs would be working furiously. The Crackmore made a strange noise like it was passing wind, and bubbles started rising from the acid pit. Andre felt a second wind of energy and managed to stumble to his feet and get moving properly. As his left foot touched the rock, the cage and the Crackmore slipped free and plummeted into the acid below. Andre's momentum kept him going, and he staggered into the flaming Merrick. Finally clearing his eyes, he stared at Andre for a moment. Realization was slow for both of them. Andre's ill-advised headbutt, however, was very quick in its delivery. Merrick now lay out cold. Andre, however, lay on his back, clutching his head. "Oh, by the gods, why did I do that? Oh!" Ember let a laugh slip out as she watched him roll in pain for a moment or two. When her strength finally returned, she opened her eyes and saw Andre propped on the other side of the ledge. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Alive," she answered, genuinely pleased by the fact. "You?" Andre shrugged. "Not too bad, although I fear I've just made the acidulous Crackmore even more endangered. Feeling a little guilty about that." Ember stood and walked over to him and offered her hand. "You might be a bit of a dick and definitely crazy," she said, "but that was fun." He took her hand in earnest and they both stood at their full heights. "Thank you," he answered. "I rather enjoyed it too." Ember walked over to Merrick and took his sword. As she pointed at the man's throat, Andre interjected. "What are you doing?" "Making sure they can't cause any more trouble." Andre shook his head. "Leave them. I mean, just look. Cheap armor, poor quality weapons. These guys are at the very bottom of the food chain. They probably took the word just to feed their families." Ember thought intensely. "Nonetheless, we can't leave them to awaken and call help." That is true. Let's tie them up with what's left of the rope." "And what if someone hears them scream?" "We can gag them." With? Whatever you like. Well, as long as it isn't any splattered chunk of crackmore. That statement seemed to deflate Ember. All right, she replied. We'd best get this done. We have a child to save. That we do. Andre smiled. Maybe his face wasn't so annoying after all. As they closed the door behind them, Andre stared at Ember. What? She was confused. Was that really necessary? What was? You hung them upside down and shoved their own sweat-soaked socks in their mouths. Ember actually cracked a full smile. They were going to kill us. Ah, Andre answered. Right you are. He then took a breath. In that case, fuck 'em. They both shared a laugh and set out into the rest of the castle, determined to save the kidnapped prince.